A spiritual successor is something that, while not being directly related in terms of being a sequel or even sharing ownership, still holds many of the important themes or elements from the thing that inspired it. A couple recent examples that come to mind are Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy, which are modern-day takes on turn-based and tactical Squaresoft classic RPGs, but are not a part of the series that they're based off of. When I think back to games of this era, I do think of the less action-focused, more methodical approach these turn-based games offered. That's not to say there weren't important action RPGs in this era as well. Secret of Mana was a Squaresoft-developed game from 1993 back on the Super Nintendo, and its gameplay was more action-focused and involved a player controlling 3 characters in more real-time combat. Trinity Trigger is a new game developed by 3 Rings Inc. that seeks to recapture the formula set in place from Secret of Mana, with a host of development experience ranging from Pokemon to Xenoblade to Secret of Mana itself. Published by Marvelous and Xseed Games, Trinity Trigger is available on the PlayStation 4 and 5, Steam, and the Nintendo Switch, which is where I played it and what I'll be basing this video on. Trinity Trigger takes place in the aptly named Trinitia and focuses around 3 main characters, Cyan, Elise, and Zantis, along with their magical animal weapon companions called Triggers. So there you go, now you can see where the title comes from. Overall, the story was enjoyable, but if you've played many fantasy RPGs in the past, you're going to recognize and probably be able to predict a lot of the themes, twists, and story beats this game has. It's not a bad story by any means. I actually quite enjoyed it and was engaged to the very end. I just don't think it did a lot to set itself apart, other than one scene very early that did make me think this game was going to be a lot different than what I thought it was.
About it. It's not like we're actually related.
But I will say though, even in moments where the story isn't hitting, it is supplemented with great voice acting from the cast. The lines felt real, and it genuinely sounded like the voice actors were having a good time. Most of the dialogue from the story is delivered in scenes with mostly static 2D artwork for the characters, which I thought looked pretty nice, but every now and then there are these in-game cutscenes using 3D character models, which I think looked not as nice. The biggest story moments even got these really nice anime cutscenes that I wanted more of. And I alluded to it there a second ago, but I do want to emphasize that the main gameplay 3D visuals were some of the weakest parts of this game for me. The character models looked kind of muddy and awkward, and this extends to the monsters in the world itself. There is some charm into the design of the creatures and characters, but the visuals themselves left a lot to be desired. The environments you explore are varied, hitting your standard snowy areas, deserts, and forest, but also get into some more unique and expressive locales in the back half of the game. However, despite the areas having some differing monsters and visuals, they all started to feel pretty samey in design and layout. This extends to the dungeons, which we'll be exploring a lot as well. Later dungeons will add in a few new mechanics here and there, but for the most part, if you have seen one, you've seen them all. Towns also feel pretty similar to one another, mainly acting as a checkpoint for fast travel and a place to restock on items while getting some extra story and picking up side quests. I did like the music of the game though. I would say some of it just starts to kind of fade into the background, which isn't always a bad thing, but there were a few tracks I genuinely really liked and made a point to just sit around and listen to. I will say I was often disappointed in the music or lack of music during boss fights though. Oftentimes the music would be hard to hear over the rest of the sounds going on in the fight, and I can't really ever say I got that adrenaline rush of that big loud boss themes that they had the potential for creating. The gameplay of Trinity Trigger is simple yet fun. The moment-to-moment combat follows the tried and true 3-hit combo attacks with a dodge roll to avoid taking damage, and it's familiar but feels fun all the same. You can customize your moveset with different attacks and even switch between weapon types you unlock as the story progresses. These weapon types offer slow and weighty feeling high damage attacks, quick and easy combos, and ranged options as well. These different weapons can be used to break certain rocks blocking your path, which are really just there to prevent you from going too far in one direction before you're supposed to. And this role is also taken up by your standard doorway blocking NPC, which could at times make you feel like the game was just a little bit too linear. I get not wanting to let me into areas before I'm ready, but I'd rather be scared off by a tough enemy than just a generic soldier telling you can't go here yet. Your weapons can be slotted with a wide array of manatite, which essentially acts as skills or stat boosts to build your characters with. These manatite can often be found in enemies or chests, purchased, or even crafted. It's a good idea to try and spread these across different weapon types and switch to what is needed for each encounter, but for a majority of the game, I just picked the weapon I liked the best and was able to get through almost anything that wasn't a boss without too much trouble. Speaking of bosses, there's kind of a lot, often focusing on you using a recently acquired weapon type and rolling out of their big red attack windows, but the bosses were just not particularly impressive. Once you get the flow of a boss, they're really just damage sponges that took a little bit too long to get rid of, and following a pattern here, they're pretty diverse in visual design, but mostly felt like kind of the same idea gameplay-wise. Now, no spoilers here, but I will commend the last boss for at least feeling like a step up from what you experienced the rest of the game. In both design and difficulty, this boss pushed me to give it my all in a way that previous bosses did not. The bosses do have a neat mechanic where if you're struggling and dying a lot, the boss will progressively get a little bit easier. I think this is a cool feature that can help you on with the story instead of fighting the same boss over and over again if you're not having any luck winning. Side quests were plentiful, but not overwhelming, and offer some good supplemental story, but they often do boil down to generic fetch quests or kill certain enemy kind of setup. I did all the side quests along the way until I rolled credits, and I did get some good rewards, experience, and extra dialogue. And also, while I did not give it a try, Trinity Trigger does support local co-op with up to 3 players, but it did make me wish I could try to play the game with friends online. Small nitpick, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Trinity Trigger is a game that often feels a little too safe and familiar, but overall still a good time if you're a fan of the genre. The story has some memorable moments, and it doesn't take too long to get through. If the game were a little longer one, I think that some of the complaints I mentioned might get amplified, but I think it was just short enough to not overstay its welcome too much. I'm happy I got to this one, and I have high hopes that the game can act as a foundation for future sequels that learn from this game's mistakes. Final score, 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching. I know this game hasn't got a whole lot of coverage, but I'm glad I got to share my thoughts on it. And shout out to Bird Dog Gaming for putting this one on my radar. If you made it this far in the video, let me know what you thought of this review or your thoughts on how the game looks from your perspective. I love reading and responding to what people have to say, and it would mean a lot. If you enjoyed your time, a like or sub would be very appreciated as well. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.